Good morning, everyone, and thanks to NASCOM for giving us this opportunity. Indeed, very privileged to be here with Kiran as well. Comes with a wealth of knowledge from an area which I have not had, which is working quite a bit with the government. Bench to bedside. This is a term that was actually a big put-off for most doctors. The reason being, it was a term that was used for for drug discovery pretty much, where what was done in the bench, which was basic science research, getting translated into actual drug that could be used at the bedside. And the reason it was a turn-off was because the time taken. The general dictum was if you got there within 10 years, you were doing exceptionally well. So most doctors didn't even want to do bench research because the fruits of that labor may not even be seen during your lifetime. So it was interesting that this term was used for this talk, but I can understand why it was so, and Kiran, you can add on here, because I've seen enough now in the last 15-20 years where we talk about innovation, but it doesn't mean anything to the patient or the doctors or the health system, which are the three beneficiaries of the innovation. So there is a lag period, and today hopefully in this discussion we will see what can be done to make some changes and see if at all we can make it happen faster. So what I've seen, and typically, Anup was here and he mentioned that the impediment to technology is doctors. I kind of agree but also disagree, because I think doctors have used technology more than anybody else. And all the doomsday scenarios that people are talking about, the life expectancy has been consistently going up. So I don't think that's a problem with us using newer technologies. That's not the issue. The question is, the technology should fit in with the workflow of anybody. If it's going to disrupt the workflow, then there is going to be a pushback. So that's, I think, one of the things. So what are the things that can be done? I feel that, a few things. So take the doctor out of the equation, right? Fitbit, classic example. Did anybody ask a doctor's opinion before it was launched? Did it require an FDA approval? No. But is the data from that being used? Yes. So do that. Make something that is relevant for the doctor, which is to adapt to what they currently do. So if doctors are wary about EHR, make it as simple as possible. And there are technologies for it. Regulations. Regulations are required for innovation to happen. Especially in a highly regulated field where patient confidentiality is an issue, patient data is an issue, you can't, you just cannot treat it like any other industry. So we really need to have all that available for it to happen. And so that regulations from the government side should happen. And then finally, much as, I'd love to be altruistic, without a self-sustaining model or even a profit-making model, innovation dies. I do understand Salk made the polio vaccine. Those are different times. The governments invested in healthcare. Even when I was in medical school, the biggest healthcare provider was the government. All the politicians, all the bigwigs went to Government General Hospital, Chennai to get their healthcare. There was no Apollo hospitals. So it was a different time. But today, if you want to do anything, there has to be a financial model that will enable this to happen, because this is where the final hurdle is, where we see a lot of pilots being done and never translating into a business for a startup, which is very disheartening. And I always say, there are more pilots dying in hospitals than in the Air Force. Because I'm a big culprit of that, because I'm a doctor, bring in, who loves innovation and technology, I bring in innovators, do pilots, but then literally dies because somebody does not want to pay for it. So financial model has to be done. Kiran.
Yeah, so Good morning, everyone. So it's a very good point you bring, sir, in terms of the need for some kind of an ecosystem to be created which can actually take some of this new innovation that we see. India has definitely, I think, seen a lot more new innovations in medical side, especially on the device and the diagnostic side. We see quite a few players which are from the local market. Just from a government perspective, I work with the National Health Authority, which is the nodal agency for the implementation of the Ayushman Bharat program. And under that, we recently created, about last year, created something called Innovation Cell, with the primary intent, and I want to kind of step back. You talked about, the National Health Authority is in some sense trying to emerge as one of the large payers. And today we pay for a treatment the same amount, whether it's a public hospital or a private institution. Now, if you look at the fact that you're paying the same amount for a procedure between public and private, and especially to a public hospital, which already has, pretty much no rental costs, no doctor salaries, so, they do have some money left over from the amount that we are actually paying them. And one of the policies we have done is to say that a portion of that extra money that they have should be reserved for new infrastructure that public hospital should buy for improving care. And two, to get more incentives to the staff and players so that their participation in the scheme kind of improves. Now, within the innovation unit, we are trying to get two things done for the ecosystem. One, if there are interesting innovations which are actually useful from the system, we are trying to make sure that the public procurement side is cracked. So we're working very closely with what's called the GEM marketplace to try to make sure that we can have some of these innovations listed for public procurement by these hospitals. And B, we are trying to create a network of, let's say we are trying to identify, so within public health system is a very large system. Outcomes or interest largely depends on administrators. But we have found that in that large ecosystem, there are 300, 400, 500 very forward administrators who are actually willing to use this money to actually try new things. So we are trying to make sure that we create that system and bring these two pieces together. So that's one little bit that we are able to do from the government side to see if we can actually encourage some of these innovations and innovators to kind of come in, and therefore hastening the process of bringing some innovation into public health.
So the other thing that was even mentioned in the previous panel was, and this is something that we've been talking with Pramod a lot, is that majority of healthcare is outpatient, right? So it should be that most innovation should happen in outpatient. And we have a tendency to copy from the West. And I mean, it's not in a bad way, because like we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. But the payer system is different. If you were to bring in something from either a NHS or a US system, a lot of innovation in outpatient happens because there is a third party payer, be it the government or private insurance. Here, it's totally self-pay. There isn't outpatient insurance, period. I mean, if you're on the government side, maybe you do avail outpatient healthcare for free, but on the private side, the patient has to pay for it. So innovation is right in the outpatient setting, where of course everybody goes where the money is, but the problem is when it becomes a self-pay issue, the patient may not pay for it or may not see the value in it. So question is, do you see a time where we are going to have outpatient insurance on the private and in a comprehensive way in the government side?
Yeah. So I think it's a very, very good point, and I think universal healthcare is really not complete without true outpatient coverage. I'll just give you a quick sense of what's happening on the government side, and then we can talk a little bit of how it or where it might go on the private side. Now, the way the government is currently thinking about primary care is that it's going to try to deliver this through 150,000 health and wellness centers. That's almost one health and wellness center for every 5,000 people in the population. The program's actually been very, very well designed because it talks about enumeration of the population around those 5,000 people and whole preventive as well as primary care that's going to happen, including free drugs and diagnostics. So if they're able to achieve those objectives that they have set out for themselves between the primary care of health and wellness centers and the secondary and tertiary coverage that's offered by PMJ, Ayushman Bharat would kind of bring in, for a fairly large segment of the population, I would say, fairly universal healthcare. Now, on the private side, and I think even the previous panel talked about, there's still, in spite of the work that Ayushman Bharat is doing, there's still about 600 million uninsured that we are still having to deal with. One of the challenges in OPD, and I've been working now, if you look at PMJ was nothing but processing of an health insurance claim for somebody who's getting admitted in a hospital. And I've been working very closely with IRDAI to also look at what should be the new technology architecture for health claims processing in this country. But the key thing that I found was that the cost of processing a claim today, because that we have such a fully paper-based process, is over 600 rupees. And it's likely that the average cost of an OPD claim is going to be 600 rupees. So you do not have neither the technology or the digital architecture that can actually help you process. The second thing is volumes. The moment you start doing OPD coverages, you're going to have 10x the volumes that you have for, India processed less than, including Ayushman Bharat will process about 2 crore, inpatient claims, and that's about all it's going to process in the last year. So if you really take to OPDs, you're going to be at about 50 crore claims in no time. So I think there's also a need to create the right technology backbone. So there's a joint working report that we put out between the National Health Authority and IRDAI called the Architecture of Common IT, Health Claims Processing. And I'm happy to share that the National Health Authority is building on that architecture. And you should start seeing the first set of, in the previous panel they were talking about the national health stack and those components. So you should start seeing, and one of those components is this component on health claims processing, should start coming out towards the later half of 2020. So I'm hoping that as that comes in and we start seeing the ecosystem adopt, you'll start seeing the environment being ready also to kind of drive on the OPD insurance side. The second area, of course, that you need to do good OPD insurance is actually data, so that you can actually say, okay, what is the cost of different things going on? And that's not going to happen unless you have the plumbing layer, as I call it, which helps bring the data together, which is again part of the national health stack thinking. So the second area that we are working on very closely is to see how do we get existing health data. So we are not talking about digitization, new digitization. I'm not saying that, hey, I need the doctor-patient relationship to change. I'm talking about what's already digital. And if you look at what's already digital today, you're going to find diagnostic reports in general in this country is already digital. Discharge summaries are already digital. And then hopefully future, prescriptions will start to go digital. Right now, even if we can get these three elements into what we are calling as the personal health record, and I think I'm a technology guy and you're a clinician, I guess, so you can tell me if that's still useful for you as a doctor. But I can tell you that it's definitely useful to create what is required for the OPD insurance product side, if that information starts to flow in.
See, we're literally preaching to the choir here because though I'm a clinician, I think I believe in EHR because that's what you're talking about predominantly, because without data, nothing can happen. And the only way to capture data is it has to be digital in a form that can be read. In fact, the only two systems I worked in India are both fully digital. In the sense, Columbia Asia Group of Hospitals, where I was for 8 years, and now CloudNine. I have not written a prescription by hand for the last 13 years. And so much so that I can't even read my handwriting anymore. It was never good to begin with, but so I would not join a system which does not have digital, because for me continuity of care is very, very important, and if I at a click of a button can get that, that's great. I think bare minimum, understanding the difficulties of adoption, e-prescription is a must. With the basic information of the demographic data, the age and all that, and a diagnosis where the doctor doesn't have to find out the ICD code, which it should be read, by NLP or whatever, and the medications given in the outpatient. So for that to happen, government has to come up with regulations saying that it is mandatory. I don't care if people want to do it like WhatsApp. I mean, you make a system where people can use. It doesn't really have to be, as long as the encryption is good, there shouldn't be a problem. Two, MCI or now the NMC, the National Medical Council, should mandate this for outpatient. See, why are discharge summaries available? Because the medical council says within 72 hours of a patient asking for their medical records, you should provide it no matter which hospital you are in. There is no such regulation for outpatient care at all. So my question back to you is, where are we with regulation? One other regulation I will ask about, one is e-prescription, because there seems to be a disconnect between the government, which is fully gung-ho and very well done and very concerned about e-prescriptions and telemedicine, and the medical councils are completely in complete dissonance. They don't want to accept it at all. In fact, they say that you lose your license if a doctor were to do e-prescription or telemedicine. So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I mean, you're right on a couple of counts. One, I think from a government perspective, right? If you look at this health and wellness center, and you look at the staffing in a health and wellness center, it's supposed to be led by somebody called a mid-level health provider, right? But if you are supposed to deliver comprehensive primary care, the mid-level health provider under today's regulations is not allowed to give out a prescription. So even within the government, this is not bridgeable without the use of telemedicine. So largely you are going to find the government clearly as a supporter on the telemedicine side. I am aware that a couple of state medical councils have written notes which says, telemedicine, are you allowed to practice over a remote link? But my own sense is, given the need and given the fact that we already know that the concentration of talent is so far between, our urban cities, large urban cities to our rural population, and still 70% of our population still lives in parts that require care. It is likely that you will see much positive or much more regulation that will come positively from the government in this. The NMC is still in very early stages. It's just the first few people in the NMC have been appointed back in Jan and so on. So do give it a bit of time, but I'm certain that many of these regulatory aspects, specifically on the telemedicine side, will get cleared. The second area that I think, you were talking about OPD mandates in some sense. While I do think, mandates from government are important, in reality, in the Indian context, we have seen that mandates don't necessarily translate because the general regulation on health ecosystem is actually quite poor. Take for example, IRDA's mandate that everybody should have at least NABH entry level to retain cashless insurance. It's been, I think, 4 years. They have to extend it every year. And between the first time they announced it and 3 years later, you had 1,000 hospitals, I think, and we didn't even cross 1,000 hospitals who actually took on what is actually a mandate, right? So my thesis is that we need actually to create incentive-aligned programs that deliver this adoption, because ultimately we do still live in a out-of-pocket, high out-of-pocket, slightly capitalistic kind of a health ecosystem. And I think if we don't get the incentive alignment right for any new program that we're introducing, whether it is, why will a digital personal health record come in, or why will an e-prescription happen, you're not going to happen. So one thing that I think I am hopeful on is the government does want to give away free drugs and free medicines as a couple of policies for chronic care patients. So, we are trying to push the idea that if you want to get free meds, get yourself a e-prescription either from public or private. So, it's kind of an incentive that can potentially push, adoption of a certain technology layer. So, just as an example.
So, I must say, since you mentioned NABH, I think that was a great thing to do. I think it's a good starting block to standardize processes.
Absolutely.
And quality in the country. There's no doubt about that. But even a group like ours, which has been around for 13 years and have 14 hospitals, since I joined about 3 years ago, this last 1 year, we've got 8 of our hospitals accredited. And purely the push was quality based. No, it was quality based. Because like you said, I know there's no way NABH has the wherewithal to accredit tens of thousands of hospitals. They just don't. So you need to recreate the system where it is done locally. That it has to be decentralized, in my mind. because there's no way one NABH can accredit every hospital in the country. So it is going to get extended for perpetuity. That's my opinion. The other way to get it done is to say that not only is cashless is not a big deal for us, but if you tell that you are giving us a 5% more or a 10% more as reimbursement, absolutely yes. Then I can stand in front of the board and say, hey, this is money. And then they will listen and it will get done. Right? So, two sets of hospitals, one hospital, like most of the hospitals where I work in, we are like, we are doing everything NABH asked anyway, it doesn't matter. But I need to get a reimbursement, and then that will push the board to put the extra money, because it is an expensive process, it's not cheap. So I think that is clearly there. And once all of this happens, data is available. And now with the availability of data, we can put ourselves through any kind of computing to generate the kind of outcomes that we want. So there's talk about preventive, curative and palliative, but we actually want to do predictive. How do we do predictive? And that can only happen if we start using things like quantum computing. It's a discussion for another day, clearly. I think we'll run out of time, but it's an exciting field. And just very shortly, now we can find a candidate vaccine in 46 days with quantum computing, which used to take years. So quantum computing will help in a lot of different ways, but we can't do that without data. And for data, there has to be environment and ecosystem created where data entry is simple and even doable by doctors.
Sure.
Any final thoughts?
No, actually. So I'm just hoping my own thesis is, I think we are at a point in India where, I think there's been a lot of, the last year has been quite exciting because of Ayushman Bharat coming in, and also the government's positive push towards creating some of these digital public goods which will enable the ecosystem. So my own personal hope is that in 2020 we will actually put this layer in place, and it will start encouraging and bringing in a lot of new opportunities for many entrepreneurs to come in and solve a lot of the problems. So the thinking is very similar to what you would have seen in, say, Aadhaar and even UPI. A few digital public goods that are enablers for an ecosystem with a lot of private innovation on the top to actually solve some of the hard problems that then that will get enabled because of this.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Arvind and Kiran. All right, I'm going to request both of you to stay on stage. Just accept a quick token of appreciation from our end, please. And a quick picture together, Dr. Arvind.